I still remember the exact taste of the airline coffee when my world collapsed at 30,000 feet. It was bitter, lukewarm, and somehow perfectly matched the moment Jennifer Walsh, our account director, leaned across the aisle of the first-class cabin and delivered the news that would change everything. Logan, there's been a change in strategy. You won't be presenting tomorrow. Just like that. No explanation, no warning, nothing. The Boeing 7037 hummed steadily beneath us as we flew toward Los Angeles. But inside my chest, everything felt like it was free-falling. To continue listening to this beautiful and special story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from so I can include a special shout-out for you in a future story. I'd been with Morrison & Associates for 3 years, climbing from junior strategist to senior account manager faster than anyone expected. This Technova deal was supposed to be my crown jewel, a $12 million campaign for their new AI platform launch. I'd spent 6 months building this presentation, understanding their market, their competitors, their fear. I knew Technova's CEO, Marcus Chen, better than most people knew their own family members. And now, somewhere between Chicago and California, I was being benched. "What do you mean, change in strategy?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. Jennifer's perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move as she shook her head. "David will handle the presentation. You'll observe. David Kruger, the golden boy, Harvard MBA, family connections, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. Everything I wasn't, everything I'd been fighting against since day one." The cabin lights dimmed for the evening flight, but my mind was racing. This wasn't just about one presentation. This was about everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed. The late nights, the missed family dinners, the relationship with Sarah that ended because I was always just finishing one more proposal. All of it led to this moment, and now it was being handed to someone else, like I was just a placeholder. The thing about corporate betrayal is that it tastes like airplane peanuts and feels like a punch to the gut. As the plane descended into LAX, I kept replaying the last few weeks, looking for signs I'd missed. Had I done something wrong, said something inappropriate, failed to kiss the right ass at the right moment? Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, my dad always told me that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. He was a mechanic, grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, and he'd saved every penny to put me through Ohio State. "You're gonna wear a suit to work, son," he'd say, pride glowing in his tired eyes. "You're gonna be somebody." But sitting in that leather seat, watching the lights of Los Angeles spread out below us like a circuit board, I wondered if being somebody meant being stepped on by people who'd never had to fight for anything in their lives. David had joined the company 6 months after me, but somehow managed to leapfrog over 3 promotions. His presentations were good, sure, but they lacked the depth, the understanding of real market psychology that I brought to every pitch. Jennifer was scrolling through her phone, probably already mentally rehearsing how she'd present this to the partners back in Chicago. Personnel optimization, she'd call it. Strategic team restructuring. Corporate speak for we're throwing Logan under the bus and hoping nobody noticed. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It was the doubt. For the first time in my career, I started questioning whether I actually belonged in these rooms, whether my instincts were as sharp as I thought, whether 3 years of 70-hour weeks had been worth anything at all. The Beverly Hills Hotel felt like hostile territory from the moment we checked in. Everything was marble and gold leaf, the kind of place where a cup of coffee costs more than my dad made in an hour. David was in his element, charming the concierge, making jokes with the bellhop, acting like he'd been born for this life. Maybe he had been. My room was on the 14th floor, overlooking the sprawling city. I called my mom that night, something I rarely did when traveling for work. She could hear it in my voice immediately. That hollow sound that comes when you're questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. "Honey, what's wrong?" Her voice carried that particular Ohio warmth that could make everything feel better, at least temporarily. "Just work stuff, Mom. Politics. You know what your father would say if he were still here." I did know. Dad had died 2 years ago, right around the time I got promoted to senior account manager. Heart attack in the garage, surrounded by the tools that had built our family's modest middle-class life. He never got to see me in a real suit, never got to see his son become somebody. He'd say that real value shows itself eventually, she continued. Quality rises to the top. But sitting in that hotel room, with its Egyptian cotton sheets and imported Italian coffee machine, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. In this world, Connections seemed to matter more than competence, and David had both in spades. I spent most of the night preparing anyway, going over every detail of the Technova account, every nuance of their market position. If I was going to be relegated to observer status, at least I'd be the most prepared observer in the room. Chapter 4. Someone said something I'll never forget. The morning of the presentation, David cornered me in the hotel restaurant. The place was all exposed brick and reclaimed wood, trying to look authentic in a city built on artifice. He slid into the booth across from me, like we were old friends, his $1,000 smile practically blinding in the California sunshine streaming through the windows. "Look, Logan, I know this situation is awkward," he said, cutting into his organic free-range eggs Benedict. "But I want you to know there's no hard feelings on my end. No hard feelings, like he was doing me a favor by stealing my presentation. I actually requested you be there today," he continued, and I nearly choked on my coffee. "Your insights on the consumer psychology angle are solid. I might need to call on you during Q&A." That's when he said it, the thing that's been echoing in my head ever since. "The truth is, Logan, you're great at the research, the behind-the-scenes stuff, but this level of client interaction requires a certain presence. You understand? It's not personal, it's just business reality. Presence, code for everything I'd been fighting against my entire career. The invisible barriers that exist between people like me, first-generation college graduates from Middle America, and people like David, who grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, and learned to play golf before they could drive. I wanted to throw my coffee in his face. I wanted to tell him that I'd built stronger client relationships in 3 years than most account managers build in a decade. I wanted to explain that presence is just a euphemism for prejudice, a way to exclude people who don't sound right, look right, or come from the right family. Instead, I just nodded. I understand completely, but I didn't understand, and I was tired of pretending that I did. The Technova offices were everything you'd expect from a Silicon Valley giant that had recently relocated to Los Angeles. Glass walls, standing desks, and enough startup energy to power a small city. Marcus Chen greeted us in the lobby personally, which was unusual for a CEO of his stature. He was shorter than I'd expected, with an intensity that filled the room despite his quiet demeanor. "Logan," he said, extending his hand directly to me, completely bypassing Jennifer and David. "Good to finally meet face to face. Your market analysis on our Q3 positioning was brilliant." I felt David tense beside me. Jennifer's smile became even more forced, if that was possible. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'm looking forward to today's presentation." "Absolutely. Your insights on the demographic shift in our target market were exactly what our board needed to hear." We were escorted to a conference room that probably cost more than most people's houses. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the table was made from a single piece of reclaimed wood that probably had its own environmental impact statement. Marcus took his seat at the head of the table, flanked by his CMO, Sarah Kim, and his head of strategy, Robert Martinez. That's when Jennifer made her announcement. "Marcus, I should mention that we've made a small adjustment to today's presentation. David will be leading the presentation, with Logan providing support as needed." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked confused, then concerned, then something that might have been annoyed. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," he said slowly. "Logan has been my primary point of contact for 6 months. Every strategy document, every market analysis, every insight that convinced us to move forward with this partnership came from him." "Of course," Jennifer said smoothly, "and Logan's contributions have been invaluable. David will be incorporating all of Logan's research into his presentation." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying each of our faces, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Ms. Walsh, with all due respect, I didn't fly my team out here to watch someone present Logan's work secondhand." The meeting was suspended for 15 minutes while Jennifer and David huddled in the hallway, their heated whispers carrying through the glass walls. I stood by the windows, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline, feeling like I was watching my career evaporate in real time. Marcus approached me quietly, his reflection appearing beside mine in the glass. "Logan, what's really going on here?" I had 2 choices. I could be the company man, protect the team dynamic, smile and deflect like I'd been trained to do. Or I could tell the truth. Dad always said that a man's word was the only thing that truly belonged to him, the one thing nobody could take away. Honestly, Mr. Chen, I don't know. I was told yesterday on the flight that there had been a strategic change. Yesterday, on the flight, I nodded, still staring out at the city. I've been working on this account for 6 months. I know your market better than I know my own hometown. I've studied your competitors, your customers, your internal challenges. This morning, David told me I was great at research, but lacked the presence for client interaction. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You know, Logan, I started this company in my garage with 2 friends and a credit card. We spent our first 5 years being told we didn't have the presence for serious business meetings. Too young, too ethnic, too unconventional. He turned to face me directly. The difference between research and insight isn't about presence, it's about understanding, and your understanding of our business has been exceptional. That's when I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I broke rank. Mr. Chen, I believe your company is at an inflection point. The AI market is about to explode, but the window for establishing dominance is closing fast. Your biggest risk isn't technical failure, it's market positioning. You need to own the narrative before your competitors define it for you. I outlined my complete strategy right there by the window, the presentation I'd been preparing for months, flowing out in detail. The demographic analysis, the competitive landscape, the messaging framework that would separate Technova from the dozens of AI companies flooding the market. Marcus listened intently, asking pointed questions, challenging my assumptions in ways that made me sharper, clearer, more confident. This is why I'd fallen in love with strategy work in the first place, the intellectual chess match, the thrill of finding the perfect angle that nobody else had seen. When Jennifer and David returned, Marcus had made his decision. I appreciate you all coming out, Marcus said, as Jennifer and David settled back into their seats. But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about today's meeting. Jennifer's face went pale. David looked confused. I contracted with Morrison & Associates specifically to work with Logan Whitmore. His strategic insights have been instrumental in shaping our go-to-market approach. If Logan isn't presenting today, then we don't have a meeting. The silence in that room was deafening. Sarah Kim and Robert Martinez were trying to hide their smiles. Jennifer looked like she was calculating how much this was going to cost the agency. David's golden boy confidence had evaporated completely. Miss Chen, Jennifer said carefully, I assure you that David is fully prepared to deliver Logan's strategic recommendations. With respect, Ms. Walsh, I don't want Logan's recommendations delivered secondhand. I want Logan. It was the first time in my career that a client had gone to bat for me specifically. Not for the agency, not for the team, but for me personally. The kid from Columbus, whose biggest credential was working twice as hard as everyone else in the room. Marcus stood up. Logan, I'm going to step out for a few minutes. When I come back, I'd like to hear your presentation. Your presentation delivered by you, based on your insights and your understanding of our business. After he left, the dynamics in the room shifted completely. David was staring at the table, his perfect presentation deck suddenly worthless. Jennifer was already on her phone, probably calling the partners back in Chicago to explain how the golden boy had just been benched by the client. And me? For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Logan, Jennifer said quietly, you understand that this puts the agency in a difficult position. I understand that I've been doing my job exceptionally well, and the client recognizes that. It wasn't like me to push back to stand my ground so directly. But something had shifted. Maybe it was Dad's voice in my head, or maybe it was just exhaustion from playing by rules that seemed designed to keep people like me in the background. The presentation went better than I'd dared to hope, not just because the strategy was solid, but because I finally felt like myself in that room. No longer the grateful outsider thankful for a seat at the table, but a professional who belonged there, who had earned his place through competence and insight. Marcus asked tough questions. Sarah challenged my demographic assumptions. Robert pushed back on my timeline recommendations. And I answered every single one with confidence and detail, drawing on months of research and analysis that I knew better than anyone else in the room. When I finished, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Marcus smiled. That, he said, is exactly what we've been looking for. The contract signing took 30 minutes. $12 million, the largest account win in Morrison & Associates history, and my name was on every page as lead strategist. Jennifer managed to recover her composure enough to handle the paperwork, but the damage to the agency's internal dynamics was already done. David left immediately after the signing, claiming he had another meeting back in Chicago. We all knew he was heading straight to the partners to spin this story in whatever way might salvage his reputation. Jennifer tried to take credit for strategically positioning Logan at the right moment, but even she seemed to know how hollow that sounded. The flight back to Chicago was nothing like the flight out. I sat in the same first-class seat, but everything felt different. The coffee tasted better. The airplane food was tolerable. Even the hum of the engines sounded like a victory song. But the real moment of truth was waiting for me back at the office. The Morrison & Associates offices on LaSalle Street looked exactly the same when I walked in Monday morning. But I felt like a completely different person. Word had already spread about the Teknova win, and the reactions were mixed. Some congratulations, some barely concealed resentment, and a lot of careful neutrality from people trying to figure out which way the political winds were blowing. The partners called me in that afternoon. Richard Morrison himself, the founding partner, sat behind his massive mahogany desk, with the Chicago skyline stretched out behind him like a power statement. He was everything David aspired to be: old money, Ivy League, and absolutely certain of his place in the world. Logan, first of all, congratulations on the Teknova win. Exceptional work. Thank you, sir. However, we need to discuss your conduct during the Los Angeles meeting. Client management is about more than individual relationships. It's about team cohesion, agency representation, and maintaining proper hierarchies. There it was, the real conversation we'd been dancing around for 3 years. I understand your concerns, Mr. Morrison, but the client specifically requested to work with me. I was just doing my job. Your job is to support the account director's strategy, not to undermine it in front of the client. I thought about my dad in that moment, about all those nights he came home exhausted from the garage, grease-stained and tired but proud of the work he'd done with his hand. He'd built a life on competence and integrity, and he'd raised me to believe that those things mattered more than politics. Mr. Morrison, with respect, I didn't undermine anyone. I did the work, built the client relationship, and delivered the results that won us the account. And we appreciate that. Which is why we're prepared to offer you a promotion. Senior Account Director, significant salary increase, and your own team to manage. It was everything I'd thought I wanted: recognition, money, status, the American dream my parents had sacrificed. But there was a catch, and we both knew it. Of course, you'll be working closely with David on the Teknova account moving forward. Team leadership, as you understand. That's when I made the decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morrison, but I'm going to decline. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, laptop open, working on the business plan for Whitmore Strategy, my own consultancy, built on the simple idea that great work should speak for itself, that client relationships matter more than office politics, and that competence should outweigh connections. Marcus Chen had been my first call after leaving Morrison & Associates. He'd listened to my plans, asked smart questions, and then made an offer I couldn't refuse. Teknova would be my anchor client, giving me the foundation I needed to build something real. You know, he'd said during our lunch meeting, the best business decisions often feel like the scariest ones. He was right. Leaving the safety of established agency, giving up the steady paycheck and corporate benefits, betting everything on my own abilities, it was terrifying, but it was also liberating in a way I'd never experienced. My mom cried when I told her, but they were proud tears. Your father would be so proud, she said. He always knew you'd be somebody special. The funny thing is, I finally understood what being somebody actually meant. It wasn't about wearing expensive suits, or having a corner office, or playing corporate politics. It was about having the courage to bet on yourself, to stand up for your own value, and to build something that reflected your actual worth. 6 months later, Whitmore Strategy had 12 clients and 5 employees. We were working out of a converted warehouse in River North, and every morning I walked in knowing that everything we'd built was a direct result of competence, insight, and genuine client value. David Kruger left Morrison & Associates 3 months after the Teknova incident. Last I heard, he was at a mid-tier agency in Dallas, still trying to coast on his connections. Jennifer Walsh got promoted to senior partner, probably as compensation for the Teknova embarrassment. And me, I'm still that kid from Columbus who believes hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. The difference is, now I'm building a company where that philosophy isn't just a nice saying, it's the foundation of everything we do. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is getting pushed out of your comfort zone. Sometimes you have to lose the game by their rules before you can win by creating your own.